please follow the emergencies, or basically leave the room and follow the crowd, and exit the building. Can I ask that you use your microphone when addressing the meeting, and that it's switched off when you're not using it. When you finish talking, just please remember to turn your mic off, and invite you to turn your mobile devices on to vibrate or silent, please. This meeting is being broadcast live and to the internet, and will be capable of subsequent repeated viewing. By entering the Washbite room today and during the course of this meeting, councillors are consenting to being filmed. That should be councillors and everybody else present are consenting to being filmed and to the use of those recordings for webcasting. That's part of the formalities. As the new chair, a very warm welcome, and also to newly elected members. This will be your first time sitting on these types of committees. I'm sure you find it as daunting as I do. You're not alone, and I hope you find it very informative. So very much a warm welcome to those new members also. Sticking to my agenda, it is right that I have to note, and it's for the committee to note, the appointments of myself, Councillor Darcy, as chair, and Councillor Gosling as vice chair for this municipal year. Can I ask committee members to note that that has been appointed? And I should pause at this point, acknowledging Councillor Penberthy is present, but Councillor Finn is not, thanking you for your stewardship of this committee for the previous municipal year, together with Councillor Finn as vice chair, and it's great to see you here today. Apologies, some confusion because I've got Councillor Ricketts on my list. Have apologies been submitted?
Chair, we have had apologies from Councillors Stevens, Goslin, Poyser and Bingley, and we have Councillors Tuffin, Riley, Maclay and Lugger with us today.
So very warm welcome and appreciation to those who are subbing for the members, but can the minutes reflect that Councillor Ricketts is actually present and it's not Councillor Partridge who's subbing? Don't know what happened there, but that will be corrected. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Having had a look at the paper, sorry, Councillor Tuffin.
Chair, I'm afraid I need to leave a bit earlier because I need to attend the funeral.
Thank you for noting that. When the appropriate time arrives, if you just leave quietly, thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest in respect of any of the items on the agenda? I see Councillor Stoneman.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be speaking on item 10 due to a potential conflict of interest with a family member working in that department.
That should be okay. I'll come to that in just a moment, but thank you for raising that as a declaration of interest. Are there any other members who'd like to raise a declaration of interest at this point? If it becomes apparent during the meeting that you feel that you should, please, by all means, raise your hand in the usual way, and I'll endeavour to come to you. Thank you. Item number 4, minutes. I must confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of February 2023. I'm sure you've all thumbed through the minutes and read them. I propose that these are to be agreed. Any views to the contrary? Excellent. Well, I will sign those at the end of the meeting for the purposes of the file. Thank you. Chair's urgent business. I do have one item of urgent business, and that's in relation to agenda item 10, Councillor Stoneman, the petition for Plymouth District car parks. Sadly, rather late, Councillor Nicholson advised that he's unable to attend committee today due to something that's arisen quite late in his diary. It's Councillor Nicholson who submitted the original petition, and additionally I understand Councillor Beer was involved in that also, but unfortunately Councillor Beer, when contacted, was unable to attend today also. When this was presented to me late last evening, having given it due consideration, it's a very important matter, that rightly so should be brought to this committee. And I think it's only right that Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Beer and all those people who've engaged in that process should be given the opportunity to present that petition. I think it's an important issue. So it's right, in my view, as chair, that Councillor Nicholson should be given the opportunity to present that petition to this committee, and we can have a proper debate. So as chair, I've made the decision that that item should be deferred to the next meeting rather than proceeding in the absence of Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Beer, who I understand had intended and do want to be present to present that petition. And I think that's only right. So in exercising my power as chair, I propose to move that to the next meeting. I turn to you, Ross, to make sure that that's in order, but that's my decision in respect of agenda item number 10.
Well, Chair, there is a gap in procedure, and therefore it does fall to you to make that decision, but I'm sure colleagues would be agreeable.
Do any members have views to the contrary? Excellent. So if we can just add that to the next meeting, I think it's right that they have the opportunity to present that here. That's very helpful. Thank you. Next agenda item, performance, finance and customer focus overview and scrutiny committee terms of reference. This is set out within your bundles, and it confused me when I read it first, but it's for the committee to note the terms of reference. And there are a number of terms of references, page 19 to page 30 and pages 22 to 23 in terms of the performance committee terms of reference. The action today, members, is for the committee to note the terms of reference for this scrutiny committee, performance, finance and customer focus overview scrutiny, and that's the second tranche of papers I invited you to consider, pages 22 to 23. The terms of references of all the panels has been included in the pack, and when you read that you probably thought, hang on, why have we got all that? It's really there to aid you in our discussions when you think, is this something that should be scrutinised by this panel or is another panel? And often you might be told in the course of the debate, well, that's not something we should be all that interested in. That's not a case that it's not important. It's just it may be the work of one of the other panels, particularly for newer members who haven't sit on this type of panel before. That might be a little confusing. So that's the inclusion of potential work items, which we'll discuss later on in the agenda. So I invite committee members to note the terms of reference in respect of that in your packs. Excellent. We're flying through this agenda. Item number 7. The corporate plan performance report for Q4, for quarter 4, the year 2022 to 23. Councillor Penber, the Cabinet Member for Housing, Cooperative Development and Committees, and Ross Jago, Head of Governance, Performance and Risk, are going to present the corporate plan performance for Q4, and I invite you to do so, Councillor Penberthy.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations on your election to what I think is probably the best of the overview and scrutiny committees. But then I am biased because it's the one that I have had most engagement with as a member.
Probably won't be
And I maybe before I start my text, I'll just pick up on that last item you talked about. Performance is looked at by all of the scrutiny panels. What this panel has a specific responsibility to do is not only look at the performance of the areas you're responsible for, but the overarching performance framework for the council. So there might be questions that you'll ask me, which I will say, I'm sorry, that's something that really is another panel's responsibility, and I'll do my best to answer it and get you answers, but they might not be something I'm responsible for, and I'm responsible for the overarching framework rather than every single area of performance of the council. I'm sure Councillor Lowry would say the same about risk and finance when he comes I know Councillor Darcy will appreciate that because he's sat in his chair doing these reports before. So the report is from page 31 onwards in your pack. It is the fourth and final report for the last financial year, and that means it's the previous administration's report on the corporate plan. And the report covers the period January to March 2023. Just want to pick out a few highlights. If Councillor Lowry was already here, he'd agree with me that the work we did a while ago to actually put spend with SMEs and within the PL postcode in order to boost local economy, it's really good to see those figures continuing to grow. That's a really important factor, not just for us, but actually shows that we are playing our part in supporting Plymouth's economy, and the spend within the PL area especially, I think is really good. It's good to see as well, we've seen a consistent reduction in repeat referrals to children's social care, because that is actually about how we are managing children and young people's lives. The fact that we're giving better support and people are able to sustain the impact of their support later. I know that's something that the children's panel will be looking at continually through this year. And it's also great to see business rate collection up to 99%. Obviously, we'd always like 100% collection. We're not always going to manage it. David would probably love us to have 100% as the norm, but I think 99% of business rates collection is a really good achievement. So there are some really good things there, but we're always looking to improve. The report shows there are still some big performance challenges, which we will be prioritising as a new administration. So, for example, the percentage of household waste sent for recycling, reuse or composting has seen a significant reduction over the course of the last year, and that downward trend from the previous year as well now shows the council's 8% shy of its target. I know that Councillor Tom Vyers-Delve is looking at this really seriously. It is a priority for our administration as we deliver our ambition as a council to be a greener city. The city survey showed that during 2022 we've seen a reduction in the percentage of people who believe that their area is a place where people from different backgrounds can get on well together. In 2021 we hit a high of 55%. It's dropped to 42% in 2022. That's really worrying in terms of community cohesion, because people from different backgrounds is not just about ethnicity. It can be about work, it can be about all sorts of different things. And we want a community who get on well together, both in their local areas and the city. As part of my responsibility for community cohesion, that is something that I'm taking seriously, as are my cabinet colleagues. Will be seeking to address this over the coming year and put actions in place that can do stuff about that. Before I get on to another point, I just wanted to say that obviously this is a performance report on a corporate plan that has been replaced by the council. So the corporate plan you can see on page 35 isn't the council's corporate plan. It is the last administration's corporate plan. The new corporate plan is already up. Because of that, we will be revisiting what the performance framework looks like. As part of that, I'm working with Ross and the team to look at how we bring forward performance framework that mirrors what we're calling the 5+2. So the 5 priorities and the 2 bits about growing up and growing old well in the city, and about addressing the cost of living, but also how we do the bits that are how we do it, so that we bring forward performance measurements on all of those with some narrative so that you can see what those mean. We're also looking to see how we not only benchmark against our own performance, but how we benchmark against other authorities' performance. So we're in the process of getting all of that set up and what it looks like. The next performance report will therefore have that feel and won't be the final layout. And I would really welcome at your next meeting your feedback on the overarching approach to performance, as well as answering any questions you might have on specific areas of your responsibility. I think performance indicators are really important, not only for us as an administration, but to support you in how you develop your work programme and help us as an administration deliver well for the city. I'd now like to move on to a bit of a national thing, and I'd like to make the committee aware of a new government office that has been launched in the last few weeks. As though we didn't have enough new government offices, and some of us might remember in 2010 there was going to be a bonfire of the Quangos, and we just seem to have more government offices coming out of our ears at the moment. The new one is the Office of Local Government. It's been launched as a new local government performance body in England. It's part of the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities. This reminds some of us of previous national audit frameworks on local government. It has 3 strategic objectives. One is to empower citizens with further information about their local authorities. Secondly, to build on local leaders and councils' knowledge of their services. And thirdly, to increase central government's understanding of local government performance, highlighting excellence and identifying risks of failure to facilitate timely support. It is not meant to be a league table, but when you look at it, it looks remarkably like a league table described in a graph rather than a table. Whether that's helpful or not, given the difference between different areas and different authorities, I think is questionable, but there are things that we can learn from it. It has recently published that new data comparator tool, and that at the moment covers adult social care, adult skills, waste management and local authority finances. That's all available online. In conjunction with the launch of Offlog, the department has launched a consultation into new statutory guidance on what constitutes best value, and the standards authorities are expected to meet by government and residents. That closes on the 15th of August. Now, of course, we can have a big debate about what best value is, and what government might think nationally is best value might be very different from what we think locally is best value. So will government think that spending with a local business, which might cost us a few pennies more, but actually delivers a bigger economic impact for the city, might not be their definition of best value, but would certainly be ours as a combined, I think, council. So with your permission, Chair, given the timelines, I'll ensure a briefing is shared with the committee, but I would ask that an additional recommendation is added, that the response to the consultation is delegated to the lead officer for the committee and myself in consultation with you and your vice chair, so that we can actually send forward a good response to that has both officer and political input from both of the leading parties. Thank you.
Just on that, I would be quite happy to agree that the consultation response through chair and vice chair, who's not present today, should be. So I'd be grateful for that, and we'll bring that forward as a recommendation. I think that's been captured. So I'm grateful. Yes. Sorry. Carry on, please.
That was the last point of my presentation. So thank you, Chair.
I'm very grateful. David, you don't wish to add on this, do you?
Nothing to add, I don't think, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Ross, were you hoping to add anything?
Not really, Chair. Just to echo Councillor Penberthy's remarks concerning this performance report being an important tool on how you plan your work programme for the coming year. So there has been some performance challenges identified which you might consider for your work programme. But alongside the risk report, this should be informing your plan of action for the coming 12 months. Thank you, Chair.
So members, this is our opportunity to put questions to Councillor Penberthy, and as Councillor Penberthy set out, particularly emphasis on page 37, the top page number as opposed to the bottom page number, in terms of the risk rating for quarter four performance summary. Notwithstanding the point that Councillor Penberthy is absolutely right on, we are looking backwards, and more importantly, to echo his point, we are now moving forward with a different plan, and I think that will probably bed in the next time we meet. It'll be a little bit easier to scrutinise properly against the new plan. But there are a number of risk indicators, and I wonder if members of this committee wish to query any of those. So anybody who wishes to raise a question for Councillor Penberthy on his presentation or the report itself, please just indicate you wish to speak and I'll invite you in. Councillor Stallman.
Thank you, Chair, and I fully appreciate this. You might not be able to answer this, but as it's in here, I will do. In terms of on page 38, the full-time equivalent days lost due to staff sickness, looking at in comparison to 21-22, it is a very big increase. So, what steps is the relevant portfolio holder or the new administration going to take to tackle that? Because that doesn't only have an impact on our services, but on the day-to-day lives of our residents.
Thank you. And were I sitting in your shoes, I'd be asking exactly the same sort of question. It is worrying. It's Councillor Dan who is the portfolio holder. I will ask Councillor Dan to furnish you with a written answer to that question, if that's all right, because that way you will hear it direct from her. And this is something that is within your purview as a scrutiny panel, so I'm sure that Councillor Dan would certainly be happy to come and talk about HR issues. But yes, that rise, not only from the previous year, but from the previous quarter, is worrying. And there might be some really good reasons in terms of one or two people on very long-term sick because of specific illnesses that can skew figures. But I don't know, I haven't got that detail, so I'm not going to try and give the detailed answer that Councillor Dan could do.
Through you, Chair, just very quickly. We had a discussion about this at corporate management team yesterday, and with the arrival of the new interim service director for HR, she was very keen to change the emphasis away from managing absence to managing attendance, which sounds very subtle, but is quite a big shift in mindset, isn't it? So I'm sure they'll be very happy to come forward and talk about what their plans are, but just that focus on attendance and making sure that people are here. Thank you, Chair.
Any supplementary, Councillor Salmon? Thank you. Councillor
Allen. Thank you, Chair. Looking at I know you've already touched on the question about residents thinking their local area is a place where people from different backgrounds get on well together. Is the decrease because of the post-pandemic spike in community cohesion, or that will just sort of, as the years go by, will just even out again? Or is it something we should be worried about?
To be quite honest, even if it was that, I think we should be worried about it. I think there are probably a number of underlying things. Obviously, this is headline information from our survey. We're currently doing a deeper delve into that information to try and understand it better. But we might not have asked the questions about why people feel that way. We might just have asked them how they feel. We will therefore be looking at how we might address understanding that more. This survey is done every 2 years. So it takes a bit of a lapse to catch up in terms of that, but there are obviously routes in through a whole variety of community groups to understanding communities better. There are potentials not just in terms of COVID, the rhetoric around asylum and migration at the moment, whatever our thinking is, the media rhetoric doesn't actually help that because it tends to polarize people. So I think there are a number of things that might be underlying this that aren't necessarily true. And we also haven't yet done the ward analysis that is being processed at the moment. And it could be that once we understand that, it could be that the areas that are most diverse are the areas with the better scores, which has traditionally been the case, in which case there's something about how we help people in the city to interact and meet people they might not normally meet. So I think there's quite a lot of potential in there for really positive work by us. We want the city to be a vibrant city where everyone enjoys a good quality of life, and that does involve understanding and others and working together as a very vibrant, diverse community, which is what the city is in so many ways. So I think that's why I raised it as a concern, because there's a lot of underlying stuff that we will go into. As we do that, I think, Chair, we will probably be coming back to you later in the year to talk about a welcoming city approach, which is not just about hate crime, which is traditionally what we've talked about with welcoming city, is the negatives, but how can we make the city a great place, in the words of the Mars advert, to live, work and play. Yeah, so that's why I credited the particular chocolate bar. Other chocolate bars are available. I think that is really important. We're just pulling together at the moment a critical friends group to work with me behind the scenes from within the city, and looking with some important leads to do some work on equalities, diversity and inclusion and community cohesion. And we're starting talking to some of the key institutions in the city about their work on that, so that we can move that forward. And I think as we begin to develop that, I would like to bring that here so that you can actually do some pre-decision scrutiny and help us in developing our thinking. We're not quite there yet. And I think that might help look at what we do that is positive in the city to make the city a better place for everyone.
No, thank you.
Thank you. My question is on residents who feel safe during the day. Just two things. Do we know why there's a slight decline in that, and have we any thoughts on how we prevent it from declining any further?
I think this is another one where I'm going to say it's another member of the cabinet who you'll need to talk to. And in fact, well, using my knowledge as the former chair of this panel, this chair also acts as the crime and disorder panel, which scrutinises the community safety partnership. And that will fall within the purview of the community safety partnership, which brings together police, probation, fire, health, and ourselves to look at those issues. And that, I think, is something that Councillor Hayden will certainly be looking at. I think it's not just at day, it's at night that people feel it. Feelings and perceptions can be different from reality, and it's important to understand why those differences are. Maybe last year, Chair, and I'm not going to tell you how to do it this year, rather than asking the Community Safety Partnership to come in and talk about absolutely everything, we asked them to come in and talk about an approach to one topic. So last year we looked at hate crime. It might be that as a panel you decide, rather than asking them to come and talk about everything they do, that you hone down on something that is of interest to you and ask for a bit more of a deep dive. And that feeling of safety could be really important, because that's not just about Vorg, that is about everyone in the community's responses. And I think that is something that I think would be an interesting one. But I'm sure Councillor Hayden would be very happy to talk to you about that, as would, I'm sure, Chief Inspector Longman.
Before I bring Councillor Riley in, you had a second point, I think. Okay, that's fine. Can I, at this point, you've astutely deflected is the wrong word, but you've pointed towards Councillor Hayden and Councillor Dan. Can I, through you, ask that Councillor Hayden and Councillor Dan provide a response to the questions that the members have raised, direct to the member and perhaps to the chair, because it's important that, whilst I appreciate they weren't invited, it's not a criticism, but it's right that a question should be provided. Thank you.
I totally agree, and I'm very happy to do that on any area of performance, whether it's this committee's or anything else. If you were asking me about another committee, I would say, actually, rather than just to the member who asked the question and to you, we will send it to all of you. And if you were to raise a question about another committee, we'd send it to all of you and all of that committee, so that people were in the loop about what we do. So we'll be as open as we can be on those answers. And I'm very happy, and I'm sure that Helen and Ross will remind me to ask exactly the right questions to both to both Councillors Dan and Hayden and anyone else you might need me to talk to.
I'm grateful, thank you. I have a question, or perhaps two, if I may. On page 38, I note in delivering on our commitments, so the second box, engaging with and listening to our residents, businesses and communities, and the indicator being how people know how to get involved. Part of that making communities safer is obviously making sure that people know how to get involved and how they can be engaged with. I note there is a decline, and it's been rated as red, as a risk. Be interested in your thoughts on that. And then I'd also like to explore the one above it, in terms of providing a quality service to get the basics right first time, stage one complaints. I wonder if you could discuss both of those in your response, because particularly with engaging, it's very difficult. There are many platforms where we engage with businesses and residents of our city. But I guess the second aspect in terms of dealing with the one-stop shop is a phrase that we've used many times in this authority, and getting it right the first time, and whatever buzz phrase there is now, that also is declining quite significantly. So if I can have your thoughts around those two areas, please, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, and this was one I was hoping to maybe avoid, not because I don't want to answer the question, but because I'm just thinking about timings. The last 6 months of the last municipal year, there was a major controversy in the city where people felt they weren't involved, they weren't engaged, they were ignored. Whatever the rights or wrongs of that, that was how people felt. And if you're asked to answer a question when that's how you're feeling, you are less likely to respond positively than if the norms of planning, licensing, road closures, and all of those sorts of engagements were what was around to be judged. So I think that there was a degree in which we have a local blip that might be part of that. And I don't want to try and delve too deeply into that, because the last 6 months of the last municipal year were dominated by a lot of those discussions. That meant that during that period, the council received substantially more freedom of information requests and complaints than normal, and therefore the systems clogged up in trying to answer all of those and subject access requests and everything else. So I think those figures might be related, and might be related to one particular set of decisions, which I'm not going to go into or go any further on, because actually I think what I'm trying to do is be as non-political as possible in giving what could be a very political answer.
I think it's important that all members recognise, and particularly those new members on this committee, that we do leave politics at the door for these scrutiny committees. Our duty is to scrutinise the performance of the administration, and that's absolutely right. And I appreciate we're looking backwards, but I recognise your response. I hope I share your view on that might be quite a concentrated blip in a short period of time that might have skewed the figures, and we will see in due course when we get the next set of figures that might correct itself. And I hope what you provided is an accurate assessment of where we might be.
I'd hope so too. I think as an administration we are really keen that we rebuild the confidence of the people of Plymouth in the council and all of our actions, rather than one or two topics dominating absolutely everything we do, even if they're nothing to do with that topic. And so it is a priority for us to rebuild our reputation, and we will seek to do that by being exemplary in how we engage with communities, with ward members, and how we deliver on what we've said we will deliver. And being held to account for that at scrutiny is perfectly reasonable. And I think we all want people to trust us again and trust us more. And actually, we want to see substantially more than 34% of the population of Plymouth feeling that they can engage with us. That will help us address things like democratic deficits, low voter turnouts, and I think that's something that we all share and we will all have a part to play in.
Councillor McClay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Penalty, I appreciate that this might be more of a question for Councillor Byers-Delve, but I'm wondering if you know the reason why we've noticed such a substantial decrease in the amount of household waste sent for recycling, reuse or composting. I also logged into Offlog after you mentioned it, and I noticed that our recycling rates are well below the median and compared to local authorities. And also just maybe like a little bit of an update on where we're at with food composting, because I do feel like we're behind on that area as well.
I'm afraid I will have another question to be raised with Councillor Brazdell to give you the detail on that. I think on food composting, we're sort of a bit caught now because the government has said they want to do it. If we start doing it now, the government won't fund us because we're already doing it. Whereas if they bring it forward as a plan, they will then give us new burdens money to fund the process. So do we do it and find the money, or do we potentially hold off for a little while and get the government to fund that piece of work in order that we can roll it out properly? So I think there is stuff there. Once again, it's something we've talked about for a while. It is something we want to do, and I'm sure that Tom would be very happy to talk about that as well, and other ways that we can encourage recycling. We do need to get our recycling rates up. It is really important. And actually, we need to take stuff out of the waste system if possible. We need to be talking about reuse as well as recycling. And I think Tom is really keen on all of that. I'm not quite sure. This is one of those that sort of falls between two panels, but I will make sure that Tom gets the answers to you. And I'll ask him to do that. I'm sure he will, and I'm sure he'll be happy to go to whichever panel is necessary to talk about those issues.
Are you content with that response?
I am. I do have another question though, if it's
Please proceed.
appropriate. So my next one is in relation to, so I'm just going to find the page in the pack. Community builders, which is referenced on page 60. So there's 12 community builders, and I'm just wondering, how will they report into scrutiny panels?
Okay, which I think is onto another report, because my pack doesn't go as far as page 60 because they've only printed me my papers. So it might be, actually, no, I've got an error report, so I'm sorry, I haven't got that page. So don't worry, I can probably manage this. Community builders are something that we've been working on for quite a long time, and the previous administration chose to contract that work out. So we're managing that as a contract. It is covering communities as well as communities of identity. And so we have a mix of work happening. It is still relatively new days, and we are looking at that. I'm picking up differing opinions around the city. In some areas it's working really well, in other areas a bit less. In some of the communities of identity, people are much more visible than in others. Now, I've actually said that I want to have a look at this because I think the work of community builders is a lot about our core priorities and also health priorities. This is using health funding, so we funded from externally. And so what I want to do is actually look at how we help community builders deliver on our corporate plan and on the objectives of health in terms of health inequalities in the areas that have been identified for community builders. Once we've done that, I'm really happy to come back and say this is how I think it's going to work and how we scrutinise it. So you scrutinise it through me, but it is at the moment an external contract, which we're heavily involved in. So we're just trying to unpick it and work it forward and work out how those fit with addressing issues of VORG, addressing issues of how well communities get on with each other, addressing issues of building trust in the council, actually helping on things like recycling, dealing with the cost of living crisis, making sure people are fed into things. As part of that, we're looking at how we could potentially even identify which households aren't claiming all the benefits they could be entitled to, and what role do community builders have with DWP on income maximisation. So there are all sorts of questions being asked at the moment that are strategic questions, and I've got meetings over the coming weeks with Ruth Howell and the team about what we do with that as we begin to move it forward. There's one other little bit on community builders that is a really distinct piece of work, which is about how we can develop food cooperatives, buying cooperatives, so people buy food together in order to maximise that, and whether we can then bulk buy food for those food cooperatives and other food agencies in the city, in order that we effectively have a wholesaler and a series of retailers owned by communities that deliver better food. We've got one in Southway and one in Manadon hub at the moment as our first 2 pilots. That's currently being funded through there. We will be looking to learn from that, and as part of the cost of living process, see whether that is actually a way of going forward. In fact, for those who remember the Plymouth and South Devon Co-op, Plymco as it became, that's how that started over 160 years ago, with people coming together to buy food together. And we're just looking at whether that is something that we could help in sustainable food for the city in terms of people being able to afford. So it's quite a diverse set of things, and we want to look at how we bring that forward, and the partnerships that support it. So I think it will be interesting for you to look at that, but at the moment I'm not really ready to give you a paper that gives you something that you can scrutinise, but it is there and it is being worked on.
Thank you. Councillor Ricketts.
Yeah, on that point, are we going to get a briefing on this then, the Community Builders Programme? Is that coming to the next meeting, or what's the setup?
I believe as part of council induction, a briefing was done on community builders. Ross is now desperately trying to think of all the ones that were done. But I think we did as part of the induction programme, a generic briefing. And I think there are more scheduled. I think the difference between a briefing on what's happening and a paper on how we actually take forward a piece of work are 2 different things. And I'm sure if you want a briefing, we can provide you with a briefing. At the same time, I'm offering to bring you, for your scrutiny, sort of, here's where we're thinking, do you think that is the right way for us before we make any decision paper? And those could be separate altogether. But I think I've certainly seen in my diary I wasn't able to attend an all-member briefing on community builders in the last few months.
I think, Councillor Ricketts, if that's something that you feel strongly that it should feature on our work programme, when we come to that agenda item later today, if it's not captured already, it's something that we can add to the work programme. I'm sure you'd be content for that to assist you.
Yeah, and as I said, I'm happy with either or both. If it is both, I would probably ask that we do it together rather than come back on 2 separate occasions, both for your time and also for the team's time.
Yeah, Chair, I meant briefing / performance report, yeah. Wouldn't want to keep them together, but if we can get that in the next meeting, that'd be great, potentially.
Well, let's have when we get to the workflow, let's have a consideration on that, because there's a few things already on there, and we're only halfway through this meeting. There may be other issues that are added, so it's a moving feat, as you know, and we'll add to that workflow through the course of this municipal year. Sorry, you content with that response? Yep. Great. Councillor, can I ask, you've already explained that in terms of these statistics, they're gathered every 2 years in that regard. So, for example, caring for people in communities, residents who do regularly voluntary work, etc. I noticed that's the, but this is every 2 years we're asking those questions to say, how often are you involved in assisting in voluntary work, etc.
It depends what the KPI is. So those that rely on the city survey, it's every 2 years. Those that are part of a performance indicator suite, so educational performance will be how often those are prepared either internally or for return to national. What we try to do is not create a KPI where we have to then generate the income collection specifically to measure the KPI. So we look at what baskets of KPIs are available. So some of them could almost be here's what last week was. Some of them will be here's 2 years ago for us. Some of the government ones might be here's 5 years ago and some projections from. So it'll be a whole mix, and we try and pick from across all KPI indicators to give a headline one under which in management terms there were a whole series of KPIs, and if you were to explore one area individually, what you could ask for, and I know that Ross and I were trying to do this last year, was to get, if you got a report, that you actually had some indications of what the more detailed performance and risk related to that report were. We're not quite there yet on being able to pull that together, but certainly it's something I'd like to see from performance in terms of any scrutiny paper for any panel. I'm sure will be able to tell you whether he thinks risk should be included in the same way when he's up here in a moment.
Yeah, it's just useful to know what informs that. And my final question, I'm not seeing any hands. So I think there's probably a very good opportunity, rather than Scrutiny helping you, I think you could certainly help Scrutiny. Going forward, I appreciate it's very difficult for you to answer for other members, but you'll take that back and they'll provide a response. But in order for Scrutiny to be meaningful on the day, it would be useful to have that earlier cabinet member who has responsibility to have a look at the performance summary like we do. Members read the papers in advance of the meeting, he says with a broad smile, and they would be informed of what the report is saying about their service area. And I think it might help going forward, the scrutiny process, certainly this committee and others, if the cabinet member responsible for that service area had an opportunity to consider the report and then maybe provide you, if it's you, if they're not attending in person. I don't expect the cabinet to be attending every meeting, that's not practicable. But in certain, going forward with the corporate plan framework, if we could maybe consider how best do members engage with, cabinet members engage with the papers. So if they're not in attendance, rather than you or others saying, I'll take it up with Councillor A, B and C, that they've provided you with a couple of lines that say, look, I've read that figure and these are my thoughts. If that question is not raised by a member in this committee, I don't think the cabinet member with responsibility would be too frustrated, but at least you're coming with some information that the members can feel that it's been a bit of a Q&A session as opposed to, I'll take that back, and then a week later we get a response. I'm not sure that doesn't help meaningful debate. So it's not a criticism, it's an observation. And I wonder through your corporate plan framework, if there's a way that we could incorporate that into that.
I think what I suggested was that our new approach would be the areas which we would be including in the performance indicators as and that those would have some narrative, including some benchmarking against other stuff. So there will be more than a bald figure in the report. Yeah. That means that actually you will effectively have that 1 or 2 lines because it will have already been considered. What might be helpful if members, having read the papers, were able to give Helen a bit of a heads up that they want to explore something further, because then I can ask for the appropriate detailed performance to be given to me. So rather than asking 9 other cabinet members to all give me briefings, which would take quite a lot of officer time to prepare, but there will be more information in the performance report, and the ones I've already seen are already giving more indicators. So effectively, the report we're looking at is a page on the 5+2 plus each for how we do it. So the report itself will already give more, which I think might lead to more questioning, which is why at that point some advance notice of what that might be would be helpful. If not, I'll do my best from my knowledge. Officers will support me with the best of their knowledge, and we might then still need to say, we'll get the answer. But we're going to be giving you more information. And as I said, in September, you'll see the first iteration of that to see how you feel it fits as well before we finalise it for the following meeting run early in the new year.
That's really helpful, thank you. It's just, and particularly like today, we've had a few late apologies, and whilst the member may have intended on asking that question, the sub may not have any idea. So members do, of course, go through the papers before the meetings. They spend many hours considering them. So I'm grateful for that response. Are there any other questions for Councillor Pember? Sorry, Councillor McLean.
Sorry, one more. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on Councillor Stoneman's point earlier about absence, and I really appreciated your note on mindset switch. Sorry, from absence to attendance. I just wanted to potentially flag or explore a little bit more. So the top 5 reasons for short-term absence are mainly cold, flu, you know, whereas moving into longer-term absence, those are mainly more like mental health related. And I'm just wondering whether there is a stigma attached around short-term absence to flagging that you might need a day off to look after your mental health, and whether there's a little bit of work to do there with council employees to make sure that they feel comfortable flagging any mental health concerns that they have for short-term absence. but also whether we have any breakdown by like gender and age to understand if these like long-term sicknesses are how it's spread out, just to be able to like scrutinize it like a little bit in more detail. And I appreciate that's such a nebulous question to ask as well.
I'm going to start, but I'm giving David a heads up. I'm going to pass on to him. I think actually what you've asked for should probably go on your work programme, because that is quite a detailed report that you're asking for, more than would be in any headline performance report, even with narrative. And actually, CMT discussions happen the day after cabinet planning, so we will be picking up on those next week. So that we're not yet in the joining up. I actually think that what David was talking about is really interesting, because if it's attendance, you're focusing on why people want to be at work, how they're at work, rather than stigmatising illness. So I think that switch could be really interesting. But I think there are lots of issues. We need to ensure that we do support staff. And I think what you're asking for is actually quite an important and major piece of work. I don't want to flippantly say that, and I think it's something that Councillor Dan would want to work with officers and unions on, in order to come back and give you a sense of what that looks like and how it is. Now, Chair, that's not me doing I'll just get an answer to a question, because I don't think that's a question I can get a quick answer to. But maybe that is something you should consider on work programming. David, I don't know whether you want to add any more from your discussion the other day, in terms of whether there is anything more you can add.
Very little to add, Chair, but I think it is an interesting topic, isn't it? And what was clear from yesterday's discussion is we have a lot of data. So, I mean, the example was given, we know the inside leg measurements of all our operatives, etc. But the point being that we can dice it and slice it whichever way we want. But it's getting to that root question, isn't it? And I think it's difficult at the moment, because we're still in that sort of post-COVID period where habits have changed. So where someone might have taken a casual day off, I say casual, but you know what I mean, because they woke up with a thumping head or whatever, they actually now by 10 o'clock think, oh, I can do my core hours because I can work from home, and that skews the figures. So I think I'll keep coming back to the fact that with Pamela joining as the new service director for HR, there are different avenues that we're exploring, so I'm sure she'll be very keen to pick up a conversation.
Thank you. I think absolutely. I think that information needs further analysis, and I think it's something we should pick up for the workflow. So I know Ross captured that. Any more for Councillor Penberthy? He does like a good Q&A session.
I'm always happy to try and rise to the challenge.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Chris, and we look forward to working with you over the next few months on those matters. Thanks very much. David, you're staying, and I think we are going to hear from Councillor Lowry, responsibility of finance and many other things, cabinet member, and you're going to talk to us about agenda item 8, which is the risk management monitoring report. Members, it's page 69 to 88 of your bundle pack. Councillor Lowry, very warm welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee. Very important role which you've got, so I do hope you do your very best and I give you the answers you need going forward. So the first report you've got before you today is about risk management. Firstly, the Strategic Risk Register, that's something that's held at an executive level and CMT, the Senior Management Team, and beneath that you've got the Operational Risk Register. These are normally reports that go to the Audit and Governance Committee, which they do, in fact, and they went yesterday, and we reviewed them yesterday. But in addition to that, we've decided to send these reports to the scrutiny panels, so you also get to see what are the big risks and what are the big issues on the council. And the reason for doing that is part of the discussion that you've just had. It gives you the opportunity not only to see what the issues are, but also to plan your work programme going forward. So if you were to look at the strategic risk register in front of you, there are some 23 risks currently being managed at an executive level, 7 of which are rated as red, and they are listed before you here. The exact detail of each and every risk, I think perhaps might be better for Ross, because he is the lead officer for this, to take you through the detail. But I'll reiterate, the reason you have this report is for your information to assist you in making strategic decisions about your workflow going forward. So this panel can be very easily overtaken by, forgive me, looking at recycling or sick attendance and so on and so forth, when actually there's some really big stuff that we should be looking at and working together to solve. So, and that will come out of today's discussions about not only performance, but risk and the budget themselves, because there's lots of issues in the budget that we're going to need your help with moving forward. So hopefully that's a very brief but salient introduction. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Larry. I should have also included you in that introduction. Ross, I'm grateful for your attendance. Would you like to add anything in respect of the risk ratings at this stage, as Councillor Larry has invited you to do so, before we invite members?
Certainly, Chair, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Allen, second time you've heard this in as many days. So as Councillor Larry's outlined, this is an important indicator for your work programmes going forward. It's shared right across the screening function, and luckily most of the risks are actually already covered through work programming. There is one correction I made yesterday, which hasn't filtered through to this report today because they were published around the same time, but there's actually 8 red risks rather than 7. Just to run through those, the risks, current strategic red risks include council expenditure exceeding resources. There is a red risk around pension fund accounting, which was subject of significant discussion yesterday at audit. Demanding complexity of children's services, which of course is being dealt with by the Children's Committee. Cybersecurity and IT supply chain constraints. Now I know this committee reviewed cybersecurity, I think it was earlier this year in February. I don't think it's on the work programme, but certainly there was a request at that point that there was further discussion here, so I think it will form part of your work programme going forward. The remaining red risks then, adult social care workforce constraints, which will of course be picked up by the relevant body. SUD's approval body is a Sustainable Urban Drainage System approval body. Now, I think we will need to review that at some point, but at this point there's limited detail, so I think that one's to bring forward at a later date. And also there's a current red risk around financial sustainability of Catered, which would again fall within the Children's Services Scrutiny Committee. There is one new risk on the strategic register. It's currently rated amber, and that concerns the capacity within the senior leadership team. So as you'll all be aware, at the moment we have a number of interims in place in the senior leadership team. It may well be worth including that as part of the workforce item going forward towards probably the end of this year. Chair, there is currently 119 risks on the operational register. This is a reduction of 11 risks in the current reporting period. The main reason for removal of those risks are no longer relevant, as advised by risk owners, or have been duplicated in some way. So just a bit of a clean-up job, essentially, on the operational risk register that's brought that number down. So 7 red risks on that register. We only report the red risks to audit and to yourselves, because if we reported every single one of them, we'd probably be here for several hours.
Say 7 or 8.
Thank you, Chair. 7, I think I said. 7 red risks on the operational register. So that again includes risks around children's services, some of the safety of some of the older trees in the city, asbestos management in some of our buildings, data security, recruitment, home working, and the school transport budget. Now, out of all of those, I think data security, cyber security are most relevant to this committee. So if you wanted to take those forward as part of your work programme, that would make sense. But of course, what we'll continue to do is bring this risk update to you on a regular basis. Thank you, Chair.
So, members, have you any questions in respect of the risk register for Councillor Lowry or Ross, having considered the material before you? I think that additional risk you mentioned was risk number 25, the Resources Directorate. Is that right? That is formerly Amber, if that's what we're calling that. Yeah?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. That's at page 81 of your pack, members. Councillor Lowry.
As I said, sir, Chair, in my introduction, the purpose of providing this committee with this information is to enable you to consider your work programme going forward. And you will not be aware that at some stage in the next 12 months, we'll be looking to renew our contract for IT in the council. A huge project that is immensely important to each and every one of us. So might I encourage you to think about pre-decision scrutiny on how the council procures its IT functions going forward, because we'll be looking to renew our contract within the next 12 months. So that would be a huge piece of work that the council needs to do along with Cabinet, and your assistance via the scrutiny process would be very much welcome.
Indeed, I was allowing room for questions, but I too share Ross's desire, or suggestion rather, that we should be looking at that IT supply chain as part of our workflow. I remember some years ago, as part of Scrutiny, pre-Delt days, that's where that started, and it's right that it should be part of this workflow going forward. So I would be certainly looking to be adding that to our workflow as a matter of urgency, considering the timeline you set out in respect to the IT supply chain. And similarly, I'm very concerned about the council's positions and how it's positioned itself in terms of security, cyber risks. A lot of organisations are fending off many attacks on a daily basis, and that's something that we, as are we. So I think that's something that we should have very much both eyes on in terms of security, scrutiny, and that will obviously feature as part of any IT supply chain issues. Also, I guess they go hand in glove. So that's something that I'd be keen to add to our workflow also on that. Great. Members, any questions, notwithstanding the fact that Councillor Lowry can't answer too many questions in respect of all of the risks, but happy to field some, I'm sure. Councillor Hendy.
I'd like to reiterate about the IT stuff. I'd like to know how the process of procuring new IT providers, does it take 6 months, a year? You know, if we put it on the work programme and it's 6 months down the line, will we be joining the process too late for us to scrutinise it? Does it take a year to put new IT people in place, or 3 months, 6 months? So I'd be really interested in delving into that and make sure we get the correct provision.
I'll bring David in.
Just to confirm, so the contract with Delta at the moment will expire in October 24. So that's why we're saying if we start the process now, because it is such a big and complex contract that you need to give yourself at least sort of an 8-9 month lead-in time. So we want to do it early and know where we're going rather than waiting to the last minute. So that gives you ample opportunity to get involved.
And I'm wondering, Councillor Hendy, are you suggesting that this should be a regular feature on our workflow, given the significance of the time limits? Is that what you're saying?
I think we need to put it on the work programme as an urgent matter over many other things, because IT is, without IT the councils don't function, we don't function, and regular updates so we know where we're going forward would be good, just so we know where the process is at any point in time.
I absolutely agree with you. We need to get it right. Significant investment for the local authority, so we need to make sure that's right. And I think in due course it may be appropriate that we form a select committee in respect of that which I think will help assist the work of this committee and, more importantly, the local authority, cabinet member and officers to make sure that we're getting the best value in that regard. So I absolutely agree with you. Thank you. Councillor Ricketts.
Councillor Lowry. Yeah, you alluded to there was some angst, or there was the meeting yesterday regarding the pension funds, which is, thank you for highlighting it in your introductions there with the general council expenditure. I would definitely say that's something we should look at, the pension fund discussion. What exactly is the black hole position with that at the moment? Around 70 million?
Black hole, I don't remember anyone using such terminology. I don't know, is it the word black hole is in the paperwork somewhere, or I can't see what you're referring to, Councillor?
I'm asking you what the pension deficit is, Councillor
I
Lowry.
think that's something entirely different. So that is dealt with by the Audit and Governance Committee and was discussed in detail yesterday. It's a incredibly complex item, which I'm happy to discuss if you want to, Chair, but I will probably take about 20 minutes to get anywhere near
Perhaps
it.
if you can sum it up very briefly in response to Councillor Ricketts, just very briefly.
Okay, so at the Audit and Governance Committee yesterday, we were not able to sign off our accounts relating to 1920, as there's one outstanding issue which relates to our pension and the way we did a transaction on a pension. So every year there's a deficit that exists on a pension, and every year the council makes that deficit up. Some councils address the deficit by doing it over a 2, 3 or 4 or 5 year purpose. We took a decision to pay it off for the next 20 years and thereby not incurring a substantial cost every year, and taking it off our revenue budget and putting it onto our capital budget. And we made a sum payment of some £72 million about 3 or 4 years ago to do exactly that. And there's a question around where actually the accounting lies, whether it lies in the world of capital or revenue. And at the moment, despite prolonged, detailed, complex and costly discussions by ourselves and our auditors, we have yet to come to an agreement. But there is no black hole and there is no money adrift. In fact, the actions we took save the council between £2 to £3 million every year.
Thank you. Any supplementary?
Well, I feel it's a serious issue to look at as far as a performance area of the council, because at the moment there's a standoff where the accounts won't be signed off.
I think just to reassure you, Councillor Ricketts, as Councillor Lowry indicated in his response, it is being looked at by the Audit Committee, Scrutiny Committee. That's within their remit in terms of their terms of reference. So that's certainly been discussed at great length in that. Hence my comment about the terms of reference much earlier in the meeting.
My concern is that it's not rectified, then it may affect our ability to borrow money as a council.
And these are the issues that have been considered by that audit committee as part of the terms of reference. So that's certainly, you can attend that, of course, if you're not a member of that committee, to observe those discussions as well.
It is good that it's highlighted within this report as a red.
Indeed.
So I think
Absolutely.
we should definitely keep a keen eye on it.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you, and it certainly is. Any other questions? Okay. On that basis, I invite committee to note the current position in respect of the risk management monitoring report regards to the strategic operational risk registers. And I should have said on the last agenda item the same. I invite committee to note agenda item number 7, which was a corporate plan performance report, and I invite committee members to do so. Moving on to the next agenda item, we are now at agenda item number 9, Finance Monitoring Report, and of course Councillor Lowry and David Northey are here to discuss that. Which of you are presenting first? Councillor Lowry?
As always. So the purpose of this report is to give this committee an understanding of where the council is on a monthly basis with respect to its forecast outturn. So you remember that at the beginning of the financial year, in our February meeting of full council, we set a budget, and we don't get to hear about the performance of that budget until what's referred to as period 2, which is the end of May. So April being the first month, May being the second month, and David and his team do some number crunching, and they bring before us at the earliest opportunity, which is in fact May, their forecast outturn for this financial year. And you'll see from the report before you that as of period 2, so the end of May, we're forecasting a potential overspend of £8.1 million for the full year. And the report details some specific areas on page 93 as to where those pressures currently exist. And you'll see, you know, some really obvious examples. The council's undertaken a number of by-elections, so there's a direct implication there. Corporate services, some legacy savings, children's services, home to school transport, People's Directorate overspending in strategic care packages and community connections. I'll come back to some of these in detail later. And we also go on to set out what the forecast savings are against the council and the capital programme. So hopefully that gives you a very brief overview as to the papers you've got before you. From my perspective, this is month 2, £8 million sounds like a lot of money. £8 million is a lot of money. Is it unusual? No, it's kind of the month in which officers bring out their dead and woe is me and it's all too difficult and can I have some more money please and all that kind of stuff. And as the year goes on, hopefully we bring those benefits and savings that are listed here to the table and they get signed off and the budget forecast deficit decreases from £8 million to a balanced position. And of course, there is a legal requirement for a council to balance its books. So we might think we can spend money that we haven't got, but actually we can't because there's a legal requirement for us to balance our books. So, am I worried? Well, actually, a little bit. Yes, I am. So there's some unusual things happening and we need to understand why that is. An issue for me is school transport. That's increasing year on year and we're not solving the problem. Children, we all know about children. You know, we've got an improvement notice on us at the moment from Ofsted. A board's been set up, an improvement board's been set up to look at those issues and address some of the strategic issues that exist in that area. A new item that's occurring, which is referred to quite blandly here as community connections, but a large chunk of that is homelessness. The homelessness budget from memory is about £2.5 million. We're forecasting to spend an extra £2.5 million, you know, so there's clearly some issues there. So a fair bit of work needs to be done to get some of these issues under control. We've got children's services, we've got community connections that you've heard me refer to. Worryingly, adult social care. Most local authorities do worry a lot about adult social care. Past couple of years, we've actually done all right in this local authority. Things have been reasonably stable, but we're seeing some telltale signs coming through that's demanding a much more larger contribution from the council. This is as a consequence of the NHS being under tremendous pressure financially, and their newly appointed financial director is insisting that people get out of hospital as soon as possible. Understandably, you can, from his perspective, you can see why that might be the case, but what that does is it often pushes a cost onto this council. So there are some issues, and I suppose it's what we're going to do about them is the most important thing. So I'll leave it there for the moment. Perhaps David might wish to add something.
Thank you, Councillor Larry. A good summary as always. So it is month 2, so it is early, and as was stated, this tends to be sort of the bad news version of events. So to echo what you've just said, Mark, am I worried? I am. I don't like to be in this position so soon into the financial year, but I suppose if we use the analogy of a football match, someone's scored very early, so we've got plenty of time to pull that back together. So I'd rather know the bad news early than have directorates sort of carry the risk and not bring it forward to me. So I will be working very hard with Mike's support and all the directorates to hone in and delve into these numbers. So it might be that some of these need a longer term fix than what we can do in year, but again, we'll bring forward plans to show you what we're doing. So I think it's easy to get lost in the bad news as well, but if you look at the table on, I think it's table 3, the saving status. So we set a very strict budget. We had £23.4 million worth of savings there. We're into the first couple of months, and we're saying that 16 million of those are either already banked or on their way to be banked. So it's not all bad news if we try to just balance that across a little bit.
Well, it's very encouraging going forward, and we're looking forward to seeing that deficit being recouped and improved upon going forward. But I know this is a standing agenda item, so we look forward to working with you to ensure that those numbers are moving in the right direction. I'm grateful for your candidness also in respect of that. But we shouldn't lose sight of the context. We're month 2. It's not unusual to be in this position so early on in the financial year. I'm sure we'll continue to have these discussions over the next few months as it's a standing item, agenda item. Members, any questions for Councillor Lowry? Councillor Stallman. Okay, hang on.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. The first one being, I understand this is completely normal for month 2, but is this a similar trend across local authorities across the country being sat around this figure, or are we an outlier above or below?
I'll take that one if you like, Chair. The conversations that I have with colleagues across the country for the past few years have tended to be around pressures on adult social care, and then that we managed to get that under control, and then children's came through. What is very clear and very evident now is this homelessness, and the fact that we've got the cost of living crisis, the mortgage increases, so we're at the early stages, and already we're overheating 100% across our budget. So it's not unique to Plymouth by any means, which doesn't take away the fact that it's we've got to look at it as a local issue, but it is a national trend. So yes, everybody is struggling with the same kind of areas.
Thank you. Councillor Stallman, you content with that response?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll come back to my second question after other people.
Okay, I'll bring you back in. Sorry, I don't have a vice chair, so I saw a number of hands going up. I'm trying to do too many things at once. I got Councillor Riley, Councillor Blight. Was there somebody else? No, perfect. Thank you. Councillor Riley.
Hiya, thank you. I'm always interested in homelessness, always. I'm having worked with homeless charities and whatnot, a little bit more understanding of what that fear is, a little bit more of an understanding of where we're going with that would be great, because obviously there are lots in B&B, but our homelessness is rising, isn't it? So a little bit more of an explanation on what you mean by what the problem is or why it's worrying would be great to thoroughly understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It's the scale, I'm afraid. It's the scale of homelessness what we're currently experiencing. In David Norby, in his previous answer to Councillor Stoneman's question, was somewhat telling. We've never had an overtly huge homelessness problem. We've had a homelessness problem, but not to the extent we're currently experiencing. And once again, back to James's comments, are we unique? No, we're not unique. And I think what we're just beginning to see now is post-COVID, partly as a consequence of the cost of living crisis, people are tightening their belts and problems are occurring. The reason I'm a little bit worried is because Plymouth's got a lot of issues, around children, adults, and homelessness. And if these issues all come to us at the same time, our budget is going to be put under financial pressure. So, in answer to your question, the issue is the volume of homelessness we're currently seeing. You only have to read today's newspaper. One person is, 20 people are chasing everyone a rented accommodation available in this city. So there is a shortage of housing, you know. So I've got an all-day session next Wednesday with Councillor Penbervy to sit down on homelessness. So what am I going to do differently than what was done before, I suppose, is part of the question. And we can just sit here and accept, oh, it's homelessness, oh, it's children, oh, it's adults. Us all getting on the table sorted out. Well, that actually doesn't really solve the problem. You need to put strategic methodologies in place to solve the problem. Hence, I've got an all-day session with Councillor Penbervy and the homelessness team to sit down, look at the volume, look at the issues, and let's look at finding solutions. Because homelessness, sadly, isn't just going to go away tomorrow now. It is a strategic, structural issue that exists in our city. So, for instance, you'll all know outside here is Midland House. We're vacating that at the moment. Well, is there an opportunity for us to turn that into a homelessness venue, for instance? Do we need to buy properties in the city to provide accommodation for homeless people? There are a number of range of options available to us. But the way in which we're tackling it at the moment, oh, it's just a budget pressure, get rid of the budget pressure. Well, actually, no, let's solve the problem, and that in itself will deal with the budgetary issues. So that's the approach which we're taking, and I think it's the approach that we need to take. But once again, there is a need, you know, given the scale of the problem around homelessness, for the scrutiny panels to engage in this subject matter.
Sorry, Chair, can I just, what I just add is, this is not a community connections isolated problem. So this is something where the whole of the council needs to come together and lean in towards finding a solution. So the plan for homes, which Councillor Larry is very involved in, needs to be concentrating on how can it help other areas of pressure that we see. So,
Thank you. I have Councillor Bly.
Thank you. Picking up the children's services issue, what pressure can the new administration bring to bear for more money, given that we're under scrutiny, we're working with Dorset? There's obviously extra pressures, but we're not getting any extra funding from national government currently. Is there anything that we can do?
I mean, we have written letters via full council in respect of children's services. It's not unique to Plymouth. It's a countrywide problem at the moment. You'll be aware that there was an Ofsted. Ofsted made a number of recommendations for improvement. As a consequence of that, there's an improvement board that's been set up, which is chaired by, I think from memory, the Director for Children's Services for Dorset, to make sure that we're making the right decisions locally. Nationally, of course, you've heard me say it 1,000 times, you know, we're not being adequately funded, given the demographics that exist in this city, to deal with the problems of our city, one of which is children. If that's going to change anything, but that's perhaps something for you to consider further.
again, Chair, if I might just add from an officer point of view, we are members of Segoma, which is a local government organisation which is very good at lobbying. They have sort of presence in the Houses of Commons, and they know the ministers and the right people to talk to. So we work very closely with them, and this has certainly come to the top of the agenda. I'm also currently the chair of the Society of Unitary Treasurers, and that is an organisation, again, across the whole of England. And I do invite the Director of Finance from our department, DLUC, to come in and make sure that he's under pressure. And the three topics that we are concentrating on, again, comes back to my previous answer. It's adults, it's children, and it's the homelessness issues that are coming forward. So we do what we can, and we do keep lobbying, but it's where that message lands, isn't it?
Councillor Stoneman.
Thank you, Chair. My other question is in terms of the variance that we've got in front, or the projected variance we've got in front of us. In light of changing energy prices, interest rates, and all those things going on at the minute, are we expecting this to change without any from external factors rather than internal factors?
I think what you're trying to ask, Councillor Stoneman, is have we got enough coverage in the budget for the external factors that came in? Yes. So if we go back to 22-23, and it's well rehearsed, but we can just put it out there again. Obviously, we set a budget in good faith in February, and within a couple of months, the world had changed with the war in Ukraine and the impact on fuel prices and just general inflation. So putting together the budget for the current year, 23-24, as you will be aware, because you were part of this conversation, making sure that we picked up as much as we could to build it into that budget base. The world has moved on again, so energy prices are starting to either flatten out or maybe in some cases come down. So that is an area that I will be keeping a very close eye on to see if there's any benefit in there. But we have tried to build in as much to cover sort of what was unknown last year, the inflation on salaries and demand, etc. It was built in, but still you're seeing that we're overheating in certain areas.
I have a question. Councillor Ricketts.
Councillor Lowry, David Northey. So I've obviously had a little break from the council for a few years. I can't remember that being sort of in any way normal to be £8 million on projections in the first quarter. Since when did this become a kind of, this is sort of normal territory? Last few, I just interested on the time frames of the normality of that sort of position statement.
It's relatively normal at this stage in the year, as I've said in my opening stage. I mean, for the last number of years, I mean, the budget deficit last year at one stage was £37 million. Don't know if you're aware of that.
Yeah, I've been aware for the last few years, but I think that we need to, you know, as we all know, we're all in this together. This can't continue every year, can it? Are we looking at departments looking at the wage bill at the moment, things like that? Are you comfortable where that is at the moment?
Be a bit more explicit when you say council's looking at the wage bill. I want to see our wage bill is £500 million. What specifically are you referring to?
Exactly, it's the main element, you know, the main element to the revenue budget. Are cabinet members vigorously looking at the wage bills of their departments to get costs down so we can get a balanced budget by the end of the year?
That's set out on page 95.
Just, if I may, Chair, just to, you're absolutely right to highlight the fact, and both Councillor Larry and myself have said that we're not comfortable with the fact that we're showing 8 million after just 2 months. But the world, it's the cliche, isn't it? The world certainly changed during the COVID years, and budgets just exploded a little bit. So trying to look back at trends is very difficult because we've got horses and we've got carriages now. But it's not unusual. I mean, we bounce around sort of, I don't know, looking back 4 or 5 million would be a standard before we even got into the COVID years and then where we are at the moment. So I'm not comfortable with the 8 million, but I'm certainly not at the losing sleep stage at the moment that we can pull this together. In terms of your sort of supplementary question, I can give you absolute assurance, and again working very closely with Mark, that every directorate is under immense scrutiny. So part of the one-off savings that we put together last year to balance the books included holding vacancies, because that is 80% of the budget lines. Now there is a cost to that, isn't it? As we can see now, that we're saying, have we got the right resources in order to move the council forward? So there's always a balancing act, but every department is looking at every line at this stage.
Thank you. Just to add some context, I certainly remember the last time I was cabinet member for finance. I think for the start of the first quarter, I was at the dizzying heights of about 4.85 million. in terms of the deficit for the first quarter. That's pre-COVID, pre-inflation, pre-cost of living. So I don't think anybody in this room is making light of the size of the position, but it's not unusual to be in that position at this stage of the year. Can I come back on something that you finished your remarks on just a moment ago, David, in terms of the pressures, the cost pressures, holding vacancies previously? We find ourselves dealing with a lot of interim senior posts on an interim basis. And that's where we are as a local authority. We've had a lot of senior position posts being filled as interims, and we're doing a lot of recruitment. Now, I appreciate the desire has always been to organically grow our teams and be able to select the most appropriate persons for those senior management positions here. Recruiting interims is a must in the climate we're operating in, but that comes at significant cost, much greater than growing our own talent and retaining. Recruitment is always, I guess, more expensive than retaining. So that's a pressure, that's a real pressure, and we're still trying to recruit interims into positions that we haven't filled. So going forward, and I acknowledge the reassurance you provided to Councillor Ricketts that we are looking at this department by department and it's been heavily scrutinised. But I'd be interested in your thoughts as we go forward as a local authority, considering the significant number of interim directors in post who are driving that scrutiny and that challenge, and we've a lot of positions being filled by agency staff. How confident are you that we will get these interims in place, grow our staff to make sure that we are making those savings? I think it's a point that I just wish to raise, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on it, both of you. Thank you. I appreciate there's a conflict of interest there.
There's a conflict here because I'm an interim.
Yeah, indeed. So it's over to you, Councillor Lowry.
Well, it's not. What I'd encourage you to do is, as part of the scrutiny panel's remit, and I'd say that's why you've often seen me challenging other colleagues in here, you have a remit, and this is part of your remit. You know, audit and governance, there's other stuff. You do other stuff as well. So what you should be doing, and I would suggest, Chair, is actually call the head of HR here, or the chief executive herself here, and ask her to explain, given that one, if you refer to the risk register that we presented earlier, it's on there anyway as a new risk. So you're only highlighting that very fact, and there are other issues relating to HR. So I would once again encourage you to think about inviting people to answer those questions on your behalf.
Well, very nicely put, but that would be my intention, is that we do hear at the next meeting in respect of that new risk, which is number 25, I think, on the list, which is now read from the Chief Executive. And I absolutely agree with your suggestion, Councillor Lowry, that we have the Chief Exec here at the next meeting. If members are in agreement with that, that would be a meaningful opportunity to... yeah, interim. Therein lies the problem, Councillor Lowry. So I think we might start with the Chief Exec and see how we get on, if members are minded to agree with me on that. Yeah, yeah. Well, we will all love that. Thank you. Are there any other questions for Councillor Lowry or David Northey? Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. And I invite committee to note the forecast revenue monitoring position. Period 2 is set out in the report in the sum of 8.140 million. And also note the capital budget 2023 to 2028 is revised to 544.214 million as shown in table 4, which features as part of your report, Councillor Lowry. Invite members to note that. Councillor Lowry.
Sorry to interrupt. Just to assist, I mean, there's a lot of information in these reports, and I'm hoping to provide more information going forward in the future. So I'm very happy to meet with individual panel members if they want to go through the budget in some detail to understand some of this, because it is complex. I get that. I've had the privilege of doing this for a long while, so I've got a reasonable understanding of it. But if you don't want to meet with me, I'm sure David would be more than happy to meet with you to help you go through some of this stuff. And If when you get next month's papers or whatever papers you do get relating to finance, if you've got any questions, once again, feel free to contact us so we can give you the answers for you to ask us properly in this meeting, to have a round of debate where you can decide actually, no, it's not an issue, or yes, it is an issue. So please feel free to contact us, and if you want some help, more than happy to give it.
Thank you, that's much appreciated. Thank you, Councillor Lowry. Thank you, David. As you are departing, are you free to stay to observe the rest of the meeting? I know it's of great interest to you both. Next item on my agenda is item number 10, but I've already indicated that that matter has been withdrawn and we will move that to the next meeting. Fast forwarding to item number 11, the work programme. And you will find that at pages 107 to 110 of your pack. So there's some points raised this afternoon about what should or could be on the work programme. And this is a good opportunity to flesh that out a bit more. But you'll see on page 107, the work programme for the 28th September meeting already has finance monitoring, which is a standing agenda item, and the corporate plan. At this stage of the municipal year, again, a standing agenda item. I think it would be a good idea to hear from the Chief Exec in respect of the HR issues that have been raised today. So I think that would be useful to add to the work programme in September. I don't wish to overload September's meeting. We've got a long year, so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what should feature in September and or what should be added to the programme, if it's not already there, of course. If you don't have any thoughts at this point, and I appreciate there are a number of subs attending for the usual members on this committee, so but I'd be interested in your thoughts, members, on you've got a list. Wow. Would you like to share the list with us? Because your writing's like a consultant. I can't quite do that.
If only I was paid the same amount.
Yeah.
So
Why take a pay cut?
Members, so from what we've captured today, if I just run through some of the topics, and what we'll do, if you're content with those issues to be considered, we'll take them back to officers and cabinet members just to agree timelines, because we don't want to set any unachievable deadlines now. So I think there's certainly from the conversations with Councillor Penberthy, there is something around Safer Plymouth. I think there is likely to be a review of that Safer Plymouth plan over the next couple of months, so I'm sure it would be useful to get scrutiny input around that. There's also a serious violence duty that the Community Safety Partnership will need to start to look at over the next couple of months on how they're going to respond to that, so that might also be useful. There was the issue of community builders, also in that section raised by Councillor Ricketts. Household waste and recycling on the basis of the performance report. The workforce report, I think there's a number of things underneath that, including sickness, recruitment, senior leadership gaps and so on. So I think that's, as a single report, could come in September. And then pre-decision scrutiny on IT provision. Now, I think we'll need to take some time to look at when that may be scheduled, depending on where we are in terms of procurement processes. Might be a select committee, so it might be a one-off, but I think it really depends on where we are at the moment. But if we can take that forward as an issue, we'll liaise with appropriate officers to bring it forward. That's what I've got on my list, Chair.
Is there anything else that members thought should feature on that list, or does that encapsulate our discussions today? I appreciate some of those would be, in terms of priority, we might want the HR discussion sooner rather than later. The IT might be November, December, as those wheels are turning, or even later again. So we have budget scrutiny to factor in at some point as well, which Mark Lowry, as the cabinet member, you said earlier in your remarks that you've been doing this a long time and you're almost very good at it, but you haven't discussed budget. Do you want to come in at this point? Yeah, so that's something we'll have to consider in our workflow as well. I'll come to you in a moment.
So yes, sorry, we are proposing to make some changes to the budget scrutiny process this year, or at least the availability of the paperwork to assist budget scrutiny. All too often, it's been left to the last minute. So government makes an announcement on the 18th of December or the 21st of December, we're all scrabbling around over Christmas in the new year to get papers out for so on and so forth. So we're proposing to get some of that work all out of the way nice and early, and we're proposing to bring it to scrutiny at the earliest opportunity, which would be late November, to get budget scrutiny out of the way then, which gives us more time to deal with some of the other stuff that we need to do. So we will have our budget set much earlier than we normally do, which enables the scrutiny team to do its work a bit earlier as well. And so it's not so much of a rush to get it to Cabinet and Council in a timely manner, which is actually, perversely, what happened this year. The budget was actually brought forward at an earlier stage as well. So exact dates, sorry, I've closed my computer down now, but we have got some exact dates which I'd forgotten to give to you.
Yeah, so just on that, Mark, thank you. I mean, that's incredibly ambitious. I'm very supportive of getting budget scrutiny in as early as possible. Before Christmas is fantastic. End of November is incredibly ambitious, notwithstanding the autumn statement. It must be called the winter statement by now, or possibly even the spring statement. It gets later and later every year. And of course, the budget's predicated significantly on that. So there'll be, whilst I appreciate a budget is a tremendous amount of assumptions, well, it's your budget. I just think that's incredibly ambitious, but I would be supportive of getting the budget scrutiny process much earlier. I agree with you on that, but anything we can assist you with that. But notwithstanding, that needs to feature into our workflows, which goes back to the comments, and I'll come to you in a moment, that we need to make sure that we can perform our duty as scrutineers meaningfully, that we have a full year in terms of agenda, and should not be held hostage to the budget and vice versa. Because the budget meeting for full council is the end of February, isn't it? So to do it at the end of November, perhaps to the detriment of other pressing issues that are just as important, we need to make sure that we get that workflow right, is what I'm saying. Because there's a potential that we might have some select scrutiny panels as well. I point to Councillor Hendy because I think he'd be perfect for chair. He was in that, but we'll see. Thank you. Councillor Ricketts.
Yeah, did Ross mention the pensions fund position?
Through you, Chair, it's being dealt with by the Audit Committee, so that's where it will stay. We don't duplicate the work which is already being undertaken by another part of our governance structure.
So absolutely remains within that committee, no other.
It remains within. So every committee, as I set out at the beginning of the meeting, has a terms of reference, and it's within your bundle at page. You may want to look at this offline after the meeting. Pages 19 to 30, and then on to 22 and 23. Those are the terms of reference of the scrutiny panels. It is most appropriate that they deal with that rather than duplicating it in this. We've got a number of things we want to scrutinise throughout the year, and it's not best use of the council resources that two scrutiny panels deal with the same issue. So
I only say that, Chair, because when I briefly watched a bit of the meeting yesterday, it was suggested that that wasn't the place for it to be discussed.
Well, I can assure you, if that is the issue, by all means you can write in to the chair of that panel and the cabinet member with responsibility if you think that it may be more appropriate elsewhere. But that's what's set out in the terms of reference, and we are operating on those terms of reference. So I'm concerned that it's in the right scrutiny panel.
Sorry, Chair, can I just, not wishing to prolong, but picking up, I think, what you're saying, because it's come into this committee as a strategic risk, I think it's, incumbent on me in September to just give a quick update, not for any in-depth discussion, but certainly to give you a confidence vote of we've either solved it or this is the issue going forward. Not wishing to
It is on the risk register, thank you.
Yeah, and I encourage all members, that risk register is something that comes to this panel for every meeting. I encourage all members, as you do diligently, you read your papers in advance of the meetings. If there's anything on the risk register, including that very point, raise that, because then we can have a thorough discussion about it. So have a look at your papers before the meeting, and we can raise that. I'm moving on through the agenda items. So that's work programme, and you'll come back to us on that in terms of timetabling. But I think we've captured everything we raised today. The final agenda item is tracking decisions. Members are invited to note on pages 111 to 116 that all the items listed on the tracking decisions are actually complete, hence they've been greyed out if you have a colour sheet. I ask you, or invite you rather, to note those unless there are any questions or views to the contrary. Excellent, thank you. Members, that is the end of our meeting. Thank you so much for your attendance and engagement. Thank you, Cabinet members and officers, for attending. Thank you, Ross and Helen. Have a very good afternoon. Thank you for